Ah. Alright. Hello, everybody, on Flipside208. We have Metroid 2 Return of Samus for the Nintendo Game Boy. Throwback to what Metroid... This is what Metroid Samus Returns was before Samus Returns existed. Alright. Want me to count down? Alright. 3, 2, 1, and let's roll. Quite literally. We will be starting off Metroid 2 with a roll. Because in Metroid 2, rolling, for the most part, is faster than running. To indulge the number nerd in me, it is 2 pixels per frame to roll, 1.5 pixels per frame to run, and 1 pixel per frame to move through the air. So rolling is clearly the best bet for the time being. Now, a little overview for those who might not be familiar with Metroid 2 as a whole. The plot of Metroid 2 involves Samus Aran coming to Metroid homeworld in an attempt to eradicate all the Metroids. Because the Galactic Federation deemed that she was the only one capable of doing so after the events of the original Metroid. So, that's where we're off to now, to find the first Metroid that we will encounter. Now, one thing you'll notice about these Metroids is they're not the typical Metroids that you've become used to seeing in the Metroid series thus far. That Metroid was an Alpha Metroid. They take 5 missiles to kill. And they're pretty random, but because they take so few missiles to kill, the randomness of their movement is not as bad as it could be. So, a variety of different games have a damage boost mechanic, or may have a damage boost mechanic. Well, Metroid 2 is a little bit different in the sense that Metroid 2's damage boost, instead of boosting you up a little bit, it decides to, if you get damage in the air, it will give you a completely new jump. So, it can be used to scale spaces you shouldn't have been able to, or give you the added jump height that would be necessary. Metroid 2 is a decently linear game, all things considered. There's a lot of movement time between different areas. But all in all, so coming up in the next room, we will see an example of how damage jumping can be used. It was because of damage jumping, we were able to scale that room much faster than we would have had we just decided to go up the normal way, the way you're supposed to. Normally, I would do a damage jump off of those 2 enemies as well, but my health was a bit low for me to be comfortable attempting that. If a run dies on its own during a PB attempt, I don't care. I'd go for it. But it's a little bit. Tables have turned a bit. Now we're heading to our first major item, and bombs are useful in this game. But if you're expecting some Zero Mission or Super Metroid style horizontal bomb jumping, double bomb jumping, etc. Unfortunately, that does not exist in this run. You can bomb jump in Metroid 2. However, because of its slow nature, the time and the difficult timing, it is really only useful in a low percent situation. Another very relieving point about 100% in particular is that there's an E-tank or health refill close by. Alright. Kind of muck that up a little bit. My original intention was to damage jump up there, use it when the block responds. But unfortunately, that went very awry. So Metroid 2 is divided up into phases. We are in phase 1 right now. And within those phases, there's what I would call sub-phases. There's an item phase and a Metroid phase. The item phases are where you will end up collecting most of your items and fight very few Metroids along the way. And that's second major upgrade, Spider Ball. Spider Ball only appeared in a 2D game in Metroid 2. It has never made a 2D appearance since. And when paired with another item, particularly Spring Ball, it opens up a whole other movement option for Samus to use. Another Alpha Metroid. In general, the idea for what I want to be doing for Alpha Metroids is be getting them above my head and as close to the exit door that I want to take as possible. That may not always be possible, but in the event I can, that is, in general, what you will see me be doing with these Alpha Metroids. So now we've collected all the items in Phase 1, and we'll be heading into what I call the Metroid phase, where there's virtually no items, but all the Metroids, or most of the Metroids you will encounter in a particular phase. With some extra damage, with Samus taking a little extra damage along the way. Okay, so what I did there is called an instant unmorph. And if you unmorph on the same frame you take damage, it cancels all knockback and allows you to keep moving as though nothing happened. The window is a little tight, but it is a very useful technique. So putting into practice, here's not what I meant when I said carry them to the nearest exit. I tried, but unfortunately, Metroid had other plans.
You got time for a donation?
Oh yeah.
$10 donation from Next Gen Gamer 9. Great to see Metroid at STR this year. Looking forward to watch the run. Good luck Flipside, and don't soft lock in Phase 3.
Thanks, Next Gen. Also, shoutouts to Next Gen Gamer 9 and the entire Metroid 2 speedrunning community. Without the support I've gotten from them over the last 2 years, I wouldn't be able to be running this game here. Oh no, that was a... Alright, this is where Metroid 2 can notably become a little uninteresting. We are simply traveling between phases. Now, given that this is 100% no out of bounds, I will not be taking the shortcut, but in regular 100%, there is 3 secret world's warps that we can take to speed up this process. Essentially, it would put a hole in the floor that would lead us to a would lead us to a specific part of the next phase. It cuts out a lot of this, but the benefit is it cuts out a lot of the downtime of running between phases. Oh, fun little fact. Just caught a little glimpse of the select glitch. And for whatever reason, by pressing the select button on a certain frame, it has the potential to add, remove, or just in general mess with the room that you're in. Sometimes it is not obtrusive and very subtle, like what you just saw, and other times it can be quite obtrusive, to the point where I would have to unload a room and reload it in order to progress. It's that accidental use of the select glitch that I'm not wanting to encounter. So the next major item we are going to encounter is the spring ball. If you're familiar with the Metroid series, particularly Metroid Fusion, you'll be very familiar with the boss up ahead. But first we have to do a huge damage jumping sequence break known as Skyscraper, which allows us to get to Spring Ball a little bit earlier than we should have. I'm going to take a minute and farm these guys. Took a bit more damage than I wanted to going up Skyscraper. Alright, we should be good now. Now, the boss in question is Arachnus. In Metroid Fusion, he is the boss that gives you Morph Ball. He's a very easy boss to dispatch of, but I do like that that is how you get Spring Ball, as opposed to just kind of getting it. But what this allows us to do is use a technique known as spider throwing. And what spider throwing is when you press when you go into the spider ball while traveling left through the air, it allows you to retain the movement speed you had while rolling. so you move at nearly double the speed going through the air. And this is very useful for crossing chasms and other large gaps of space. But interestingly enough, the spider throw only works while going left. Whether it was a flaw, whether spider throwing was intentional, it just simply wasn't patched or programmed to go right, or whether it was a bug, which is the most likely answer, but so, high jump boots can be both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it gives you a bit more control over your jumps. But the consequences for messing up a jump and going 1 pixel too far can be just as severe as little series of damage jumps that it's called the Three Stooges. Right now we're just going and collecting. Won't see many more Metroids in this particular section. It's just a little bit of item collection and hopefully not getting damaged. Oh, another thing that the Spider Ball allows for is greater use of unmorph jumping. So if you unmorph at a certain point after you fall off a ledge in morph ball form, and you can have a jump, and when you get spring ball, you can jump up in the air with morph ball, and then unmorph and get the unmorph jump. So it nearly doubles the distance you can jump out of ball form. Alright. Quick little Metroid fight. Fastest way to dispose of him is to get him into the ceiling. So right now, he's not the only Metroid that can be pushed into the ceiling. And not even the only object that can be pushed into the ceiling, but the only Metroid where it counts at the moment. Alright. So the next item we're going to go get right now is the Various Suit, which is a godsend for the run. More so for 90%, but what the Various Suit does that's significant is it makes you run as fast as you roll, which means less room for missed inputs, because I don't have to morph nearly as much. Now, That doesn't mean there are still times where morphing is better, but because they don't have to morph near as much, there's not the possibility of accidentally activating Spider Ball or just not morphing it. In addition to that, it reduces damage as you would expect. Not exactly by half, but for example, it reduces Gamma Metroid damage from 20 to 10, but it only reduces Alpha Metroid damage from 10 to 8. Speaking of Gamma Metroids, the next stage in the Metroid life cycle. These guys take 10 missiles to kill. However, unlike alphas, the randomness and the erratic patterns of their movement are felt much more because they take 10 missiles to kill, and the lightning they shoot will eat missiles for and so it makes it pretty difficult to keep them contained, unlike Alpha Metroids, where you can just juggle them. Fortunately, the rooms that Gamma Metroids occupy tend to have a wall that you can pin them against. Got one more Metroid in this phase, and a missile tank that might have gone under the radar for most Metroid 2 players back in the 90s. Well, this is a perfect example of what I mean when there's typically a wall you can pin them against. Now we've got the earthquake, signifying that a level of acid has dropped in the planet and we can progress further, and usually indicating the end of a phase. But we've got one more missile tank to collect before we can move on and head into what I like to refer to as the Gamma Gauntlet. The section right here is a little tense for me as the runner-up. If I fail to activate Spider Ball fast enough, I will fall not just down, but all the way down, and have to climb up again. So the last thing that I want is that. So it requires Spider Ball activations to be super, super precise. But now, by my definition, we are done with Phase 2. And can head on to the Gamma Gauntlet. If you're confused about why I refer to it that way, all will make sense. Easier to... Back to the travel between phases. By far, my least favorite part of this category. But in 2.5 years, I'd say that running between the phases like this, it builds character. And a little bit of patience. No. So, in the approaching room, it may look as though I can simply just roll under these enemies, and that they will, by the time I get to them, they will be high enough for me to roll under. But in reality, if I were to just hold right, I would get hit by 3 out of 4 of those enemies. So I found that you have to actually if you let go of the D-pad for a fraction of a second, it will give you just enough time to get under them. Followed by another item that was introduced in Metroid 2 that later became a staple with Space Jump. The Space Jump functions like it does in every other Metroid game. However, it definitely it definitely feels primitive, because hopefully I won't have to experience the flaw of Space Jump, but suffice to say, if I do muck up one of the space jumps, then it could be a long way back up. Despite the fact that Gamma Metroids seem like missile sponges, this isn't too bad, because 100%... Oh no. There's always another missile refill or missile expansion to get. Coupled with the fact that missile expansions give you 10 missiles instead of the traditional 5. Gives a nice little bit of leeway on those Gamma Metroids. Whoops. But now, there is a route that only collects 2 missile refills, and the Gammas being missile sponges is a much, much bigger problem with that particular refill route. Alright, hopefully this Gamma will behave. Awesome. Most of the Gammas have strats like that are easy to exploit, but a few can be very problematic. Alright, let's go finish off the item phase and get into the real meat of the Gamma Gauntlet. Nice little taking advantage of damage jumping in Morph Ball for an E-Tank and a missile expansion. This fourth E-Tank is going to prove especially useful at the end of this phase. But that is all the items for Phase 3 that we will be collecting. And now, to go finish off the 6 Metroids left in the phase. Thankfully, because of spider throwing, instead of trying to finagle our way around them, we can just do a really nice series of spider throws and circumvent them altogether. Oops. Alright. That is the optimal, like, that Gamma Metroid went as optimal as it could. Ugh. Use this nice Metroid to get up into this shaft. We're not going to forget about him. No, we can't forget about him, but with the Alpha Metroid, I'm more concerned about his brother at the moment. Alright, we're going to try to go for an instant unmorph. See? Told you we wouldn't forget about him. If you haven't been keyed in as to why I call this the Gamma Gauntlet, 99% of the Metroids I've fought have been Gammas. And usually, they don't behave this well. I'm honestly pretty shocked, actually. Because Metroids don't usually behave in a manner such as this. Usually, Samus needs to become Super Cowgirl Samus in order to wrangle them and corral them into the right areas. Yeah, of course, this one's going to give me a little trouble, but... Alright. Now we're getting into the big macro-level sequence break of Metroid 2, known as Acid Dive. The way the game intends you to take, you're supposed to go all the way out, come all the way back after killing a Metroid, and then go all the way back again. But we're speedrunners. We don't have time for that. And because Metroid 2 says you have to kill a certain number of Metroids in each phase, we have to kill a Metroid. But it never says which order you have to kill the Metroids in. So theoretically, I could do all sorts of secret world stuff and go to the end of the game, kill all the Omegas, and then go from the Omegas down to the Alpha Metroid, the very first Alpha Metroid. But this is the only time where we'll take advantage of doing Metroids out of order. And because it said we had to kill a Metroid, killed the Alpha Metroid, the acid now is lowered in this area. Which allows us safe passage. And it also means we now don't have to backtrack near as much as we would have, and as the game would have wanted you to. I recall playing it when I played this game for the very first time that I did acid dive simply because I couldn't find... there was nowhere else I could have thought to go. Alright, another missile refill. If we got everything, missiles should be at 210. Which, thankfully enough, it is. Now on to go kill the Metroid we were supposed to kill. The game wants you to kill first. That's... Back on the game's intended route. If you can't already tell, Samus loves to roll around in SR388's acid. And hoping this next Metroid is going to behave. If it does behave, all will be well. Okay, no, it didn't behave whatsoever. Ugh. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to get it under that line of rocks and trap it for 8 or 9 missiles and then finish it off and leave it and head out the door. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. But we actually, most of us in the Metroid 2 community didn't know that strat existed until relatively recently. A Metroid 2 runner, Behemoth, who was more well known for Super Metroid, ran any percent back in 2012. And because the run was so old, and 100% is the de facto category for Metroid 2, nobody thought to look at the run. And so for years, there were these strats that were pretty viable, but nobody knew about them because nobody had watched the run until late 2015, early 2016. Unfortunately, I cannot get it. I have to be super careful with that Metroid that it doesn't get to the right of me. Because it ends up on my right, and I were to push it back to the door. You can actually push Metroids out of the rooms they're in. And then have to restart the fight. So I could put 9 missiles into it, accidentally push it out the door, and then have to redo the entire fight because Metroid seemed to regain all their health when Samus looks away from them. Coming up, we have our first Zeta Metroid. Zeta Metroids take 20 missiles to kill and can be stun-locked. However, there is a chance that if you are not mashing fast enough, or just because the game says so, the Zeta Metroid can throw a fireball at you, disrupt the stun lock because you're... and then wreak havoc on your life. So, Metroid 2 has 4 individual beams, Ice Beam and Wave Beam, which were introduced in the NES Metroid, and 2 new additions, the Spacer Laser and the Plasma Beam. You can only have one beam upgrade at a time. And since beams obsolete each other, we decided that we only had to collect Ice Beam, being as it's the most useful. there was a time when beam collection, and you had to grab each beam at least once. And there was a time when that was required. But because beams were concentrated in the center of Phase 5, if I were to go up that shaft, I would find all 4 beams. It was decided that it was kind of redundant to collect all of them. Alright. So, remember the missile tank that was in the ceiling in Phase 2? Well, that missile tank not only has a twin, but it has a fraternal triplet as well. Has an identical twin missile tank, but it also has a triplet in this E-tank that's up here. Coming up is my least favorite Metroid in the entire game. Known as the Sand Gamma. And what's especially bad about it is there's not only no strat for it, but Metroid seems to think that sand is water, whereas Samus seems to think that it is dried concrete. And so not only can the Metroid move around wherever it wants, but the sand comes back. So it just makes for a fun fight, to say the least. Okay, that could have been... that was almost super disorienting. And that makes all 6 E-tanks. Metroid 2 will only show 5 E-tanks, but there are 6 collectible E-tanks. Similarly, I believe it's Metroid NES only shows 6, but there's like 8 collectible E-tanks or something. Essentially, what I did is called the Zeta Zag. And it's a way to get Screw Attack before that Metroid. This has 2 benefits. One, we don't have to Spider Ball up there, which Spider Ball is extremely slow. But, additionally, it helps get that Zeta Metroid into a favorable position. That could have been disastrous. But, thankfully, despite breaking the stun lock, I was able to get it taken care of. Oh no. No. Alright, that is what can happen if the game's Screw Attack mechanics decide to take your game for a joyride. Fell pretty far down. We're almost done with phase 5. And in turn, the Zeta Metroids. Okay, that Metroid was absolutely crucial that he stay in the stun lock. Because if said Metroid were to get out, not only would it turn into a situation like that with the Sand Gamma, but it would be much worse. Because unlike the Gamma, Zeta Metroids can be damaged from below. And Samus in this game makes a good deep space bounty hunter, but not a good deep space cowgirl. Alright, we are on to Phase 6. The final phase of the game, in a sense. Before... last phase before the Queen Metroid's areas. Oh, wait, we're pretty deep in SR388 by now. Why is there this random alpha? Well, that alpha is both the true final boss of Metroid 2, being the fittest alpha Metroid, and probably the fittest Metroid of the bunch. So, normally what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to go through that door scene transition, find out the acid has risen, go all the way around through another scene transition, only to discover that the reason the acid was raised in the first place is due to the Omega Metroids. However, the game only keeps track of how many scene transitions happen, not where the scene transitions happened. So essentially all we needed to do to activate the second scene transition was to go back, go through and back in. Go out and back in. For that handsome little fellow of an Omega Metroid was an Omega, and they generally take 40 missiles to kill. However, they have an exploitable weakness in that if you shoot them in the back, it takes 14 missiles to kill. Furthermore, you can do a pseudo stun lock on them, and if you place missiles in the correct timings, you will be able to keep it facing away from you so that you can quickly pump those 14 missiles into it. Ideally, by the end of this phase, I will have about 3 E-Tanks worth of health and 150 missiles. Whether it works that way will be dependent on whether I can... the Omega's initial behavior upon starting the encounter, and whether or not I can keep them stunned. So can we go 2 for 2? I wonder. Two for 2. Two more Omegas left to deal with. One of them is in an identical room to the one we just fought in. And the other one is not as easy. Room is quite a bit different. Now, I normally would have activated missiles, but there is a possibility that I would have opened a hole in the wall and essentially soft-locked. Alright, 3 for 3 on the perfect Omega chart. We can get 4, that will be... It will be a great phase 6 run. Rarely do they ever behave in such a manner that would allow for 4 perfect Omegas. Normally, I usually can get 2 or 3. 4 is always a bit of a stretch. Four perfect Omegas. What are the odds? I am in awe that that actually happened. Now we are ready to head to the final area of the game. Now, one genius design I thought of, or there is about Metroid 2: Return of Samus, is that there's a subtle decline in both vegetation and enemy life the deeper you go into the planet. From the surface of SR388 teeming with life and enemies, whereas its deepest parts hold nothing but stone and ruins. I think that is a pretty genius design for a game in 1991. Now there's only one Metroid left to kill. That Queen Metroid is hopefully going to be in a good mood and not be too terribly trolly. So in this next room I have to be especially careful when spider throwing, because if I overextend with the spider throw, then I will end up all the way back at the bottom of the area, which is not an area that I want to go back to. But fortunately enough, we were able to make it through. into some of the jankiest physics this game has to offer. Gonna land on that for safety. I don't trust my space jumping abilities. Now we are in the final area of the game. Oh, but wait. See, you're not only just going to go fight the Queen, but you're also going to go fight You're also going to go fight 8 larval Metroids. Larval Metroids are, fun fact, never mentioned anywhere in Metroid 2's instruction booklet. So, couple that with the Metroid counter being at 1 after the final Omega kill. If you ask me, that's a pretty cool little way to hide the larval Metroids within the game. Now, unfortunately, they are, while they don't show on the Metroid counter, they do, however, show up in the game's code. And if you kill the final Omega Metroid, you can't just go straight to the Queen's room, even if you could. So, the Queen Metroid takes either 150 missiles to kill, or 5 trips into its stomach. Or a combination thereof. 60 and 3 is the sweet spot, and what we would consider a 3-cycle Queen. Hopefully this is a 3-cycle. I'm very bad about counting missiles. I was 1 missile off from a true 3-cycle. Getting tongue-tied. No. The Metroid counter truly reads 0. Except for that one baby Metroid that isn't detected by super advanced technology. To my knowledge, Metroid 2 is the only Metroid game in the series without a countdown timer. In any capacity whatsoever. Alright. Time will be coming up momentarily. We'll try to dunk Samus here. And time. And now we're greeted by my personal favorite part of the game. The end credits. Ugh.